Okay, so now we're going to add in a little color to our boat. So to add color, what we want to use here is the paint bucket tool. So the paint bucket tool works like this. We choose a fill color, so I'll just choose green, and we bring the paint bucket over and click on this area, and it will fill it in with our chosen color. Now, one thing you have to watch out for is this. Let's say there is a gap somewhere, and I'll just use my eraser here to erase a gap. So if somewhere in my thing I have a gap and I try and use the paint bucket tool, it will not fill in. Now, one of the options with the paint bucket tool is if I have some gaps, sometimes I can't even see the gaps, I can choose to close large gaps. And even then, that gap is too big. So you do have to play around with that. If you have a gap anywhere in your area, it will not fill in. So there's my filled in boat area. So the next thing I'm going to do is, and I'll come back to this in a bit, I'm going to draw myself a mast for my boat. And for that, I'm just going to use a rectangle tool. And I'm going to make sure that I have selected no fill. I'll go fill that in a little bit later. So for the mast, I'm going to draw a rectangle and just click and drag and make a rectangle. Now, that rectangle problem is I would like it to be perpendicular to the boat because that's how a mast would look. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag a selection window around my mast, and I'm going to use the free transform tool. This will help me change the shape of it. The free transform tool gives me these little handles, and I can drag it out, make it a bigger rectangle, or I can skew it. I can shift one side up and the other down, or I can move the whole thing. What I want to do is rotate it. So I'm just going to rotate it so it's at right angles to my boat, and then I'm going to select it, and I'm going to drag the whole thing up. So it's about a third of the way to the front. Okay, so there's my mast. Now I want to draw a sail, and I'm going to use the brush tool. Sorry, not the brush tool. I'm going to use the pen tool to draw the sail. Now the pen tool is kind of like the brush tool, but what you do is you select your points, and then you can change the shape of the curve as it goes along. Okay. Now this one takes a little practice, so I'm actually just going to go back and just use this, and I'll make sure I've got that smoothed. So I'll just make a sail that looks like this. Make sure I connect up to the back there. This is oddly a little rougher than it usually is. I wonder if my smoothing options are not set. And I'll draw a little bowsprit too. Usually I can get much smoother lines with this. There we go. Okay. So I'll draw on that mast. Now what I want to do is I'm going to fill these in, so I'll choose my paint bucket tool. But what I want to do is I'm going to change my color here. So you notice if I click here, these are all the standard palettes. I'm going to do a radial fill for the mast. Radial fill looks like this. Looks like I'm going to have to close some gaps here. There we go. Now what a radial gradient fill is it starts out at one color and then blends into another color very gradually. And you can see that if you take a look at the color mixer over here. So here's the color mixer. I have my fill set to going from blue to black. So it starts out blue, fades into black. So there's the center is blue, and it fades out into black. And I can play around with that. Of course, I can add in a color. So maybe I want it to go from blue to orange to black, which looks kind of strange, but you know, I wouldn't do that really. Some color choices just don't work, so I'll just stick with that one. But you can play around with that. You can add in colors. If you don't like the colors, you can press Control, and you can cut that color out, and that'll go back to its original color. There we go. Okay. So that's an interesting. The gradient tool is a really interesting tool to play with. So I want to use a 3D effect on the mast, and to do a 3D effect on the mast, I'm going to use a linear fill. So a linear fill I can choose down here. Actually, I can go up here, and in my color mixer I can choose a linear fill. And I'm going to fill from, I'm going to delete this. I'm going to select this, and I'm going to change its color to white. So I want to fade from white to black. And if I fill here, I'm going to zoom in just to show this bit right here. Oh, another thing, if you're, there we go. So there's my mast, and I've got a fill pattern. It goes from black up to white up here, and that's not exactly what I want to change the direction of that fill. So if I click and drag my paint bucket, I can choose the direction I want that fill to go. So I want that fill to go in this direction. Trying to get perpendicular to the mast. And what I'm trying to aim for, if this will work for me, I'm aiming for, let's try it like this. I'm aiming for a radial or a gradient fill that kind of makes it a 3D effect. And a little bit tricky here. There we go. That's not too bad. So you can see it's dark on the front and light on the back. That took a few tries, but it has to line up perfectly, and that's a little bit tricky. So dark in the front, light in the back, kind of looks like it's shaded, gives it a bit of a cylindrical appearance. So I'm going to zoom out, show all, and now I made a mistake at the beginning of the video. I should have saved this as boat01. I didn't do that. I can do that now, and I'll call that boat01.